This presentation was, or this symposium rather, was the result. We had one a couple of months ago that was also on the participation of teenagers in the facilitation of border crossings and migrant smuggling. And one of the recommendations that we received at that time was like, could you please write, or do something about social media? We know that it's relevant. We know that there's all of this activity, but we really want to get a grasp of what is happening. So that's why we invited, the International Rescue Committee to join us today. They are going to be sharing information about an actual initiative on, how to disseminate accurate information to people on the move. So we are very excited about them accepting our invitation. Sorry that I have to, look at you, you're right behind the screen. But we wanted to start, with giving you a kind of an overview of where we stand when it comes to some of this online activities. And we're going to leave plenty of time at the end of this first part of the symposium for questions. So please write them all down. And we'll do our best to answer them. Also, if within your organization you have direct experience, direct expertise, or engagement with this kind of activity, and you are willing to share some of those experiences, please feel free to do so as well. Okay. So I think it doesn't come, it's not a surprise that we have millions of the people, who are moving around the world. We have, if you're following the news, we have the case in Yemen. Human Rights Watch a couple of weeks ago released a report about thousands of people who are leaving from the Horn of Africa into Yemen to get to Saudi Arabia, and some of the abuses that they are facing as they move through. There's, of course, the challenges in the Mediterranean, Lampedusa, this island, off of the coast of Italy that is receiving thousands of people per day as well that are arriving on the boats from North Africa. And, well, especially here, the case in the Americas. Most of the mobility that we're witnessing in the continent, especially in South America, involves people from Venezuela, even though most of them are actually staying within South America. Many times because we are here and we see the numbers and we see the statistics, we think they are all coming here. At least 4 million people, 4 million people from Venezuela have actually remained in the cone, in South American countries, going primarily to Colombia, Ecuador, and some of them going down to Argentina and Chile. So despite this perception that most migrations are actually regional, people remain within their own communities. They don't seek to go very far away. There's the visibility, and what the actual data is showing us. Also in the case, and this is something that we get to see here on the U.S.-Mexico border, we have, again, the presence of Venezuelan migrants. We have we've had several episodes of people from Haiti arriving, which involves, a very unique set of challenges, given the language differences, and also the racism that many of them face. And most recently, and I was actually thinking, a lot about the chief, in terms of extracontinental migration, people from countries outside of the Americas, people from the Middle East, people from Africa. We were just discussing that it is not unlikely that people from Morocco start arriving within the next few weeks, following the earthquake, if you recall that, and we can talk. If you're interested to look into that as well, I'll be happy to share some information on that. But these are, looking back at the routes and how they are, what we're facing here, in the Americas. Most of the people who continue to arrive to the U.S.-Mexico border, are from Central America, Venezuela. There's in South America right now, there's also the concern over the shutting down of the border with Chile and the inability of people to enter, to go south. That is, in turn, generating some dynamics, some groups of people who are going back up north. Once they made it to Chile and they realized that the border is closed, so they start going up, considering, coming up to the U.S. And that also involves crossing the Darien Gap. Maybe you have also been following the news. A couple, maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago, there were several reports, on the very high numbers of people who are crossing the Darien. Many of them are also from Venezuela, from Haiti, people who are not coming directly from Haiti, though. They're, again, people who are living in countries like Argentina and Chile, primarily, and due, again, to racism, discrimination, and some of the changes that prevent them from acquiring citizenship, for their children to acquire citizenship, or for them to acquire regular migration status. So how, do people move? This is, we can spend an entire semester, talking about how people move and who is behind a lot of their movements. But in general, and this is a chart that you would find in the 2018 edition of the UNODC report on global migrant smuggling. So we can, even though most of the time we talk about networks, about transnational organizations existing, they have, there's this typology that is, kind of like widely accepted at this point. We do have hierarchical organizations, where there's a more pyramidal structure with somebody at the top. They are well organized. They frequently organize very long journeys. So, for example, those that may take place from West Africa or Central Africa, arriving to Brazil and then coming up north. There's also, this organization in terms of networks that are looser networks where collaborators, come together occasionally on an occasional basis. And let me see over here. Then we also have this mixed kind of organization, like people who operate at a local level and a more individual level, facilitating, for example, transporting people across a specific segment, obtaining a document, bringing food, bringing water, but who perhaps don't have a direct connection to a cluster of facilitators. So this is typically, how most organizations around the world are facilitating transits. And at the same time, it is very important to consider the fact that not everybody's journeys, are going to be the same. Many times we talk about people on the move saying, well, everybody goes through that, or everybody's traveling with a smuggler. Or, or we hear in our settings, the places where we work, that people are buying packages to get here and they get multiple tries with the smuggler to cross a specific border. But here, and this is something that from, this experience in South America that I just came back from, made really clear. People have different amounts of resources at their disposal. So there's going to be those whose families and loved ones are going to be able to afford these more all-inclusive packages. In the case of Mexico and here on the U.S.-Mexico border, we probably heard about those, where you pay a fee and that includes your travel, room and board, any kind of payments that have to be paid, including bribes or piso, depending on where you were traveling from. In some instances, even, visas that were acquired, what would be the word, through bribes, but that allow people to travel more safely. Then something that we have been able to document around the world is this pattern or pay-as-you-go journeys. So people are not just, people cannot afford, or their families cannot afford, to just make a huge payment at the beginning. And many of them just have to leave their communities right on the spot. So they go as far as their money takes them. They may arrive at a location in Central America, in Southern Mexico, or here to the U.S.-Mexico border. They start working, they save a little bit of money, and then they continue their journey. So in that, as you can also imagine, that makes these journeys longer, and it also exposes a lot of people to other risks, like violence, in the street, gender-based violence. And last but not least, we have the most vulnerable of migrants. These are people who have many times no connections whatsoever to a community, who just had to leave, right on the spot. For those of you who work here on the U.S.-Mexico border, many of you have been talking with people from Venezuela, for example. Many of them have, didn't really have a lot of connections, didn't have a lot of money to start with, to travel, but they had been relying on humanitarian assistance along the way. They also rely on begging, or some of them may also work. So they start putting together those little pieces of resources that they as they move through their journeys. And at the same time, these are not, what's the word for that? Independent categories. Many times you're going to find people who paid for an entire package and they may find themselves abandoned at some point during their journeys. This is something that we get to hear about quite often. People who are scammed, that are also, we're going to be talking about those in a second. And again, people who also benefit in many occasions for the kindness of others, of humanitarian groups that are able to cut through some stages of their journeys. Okay. So, but what would we, in looking more closely into what is going to be our conversation today, like what brings people together? What is the reason behind, or what's the common factor rather that joins all of these journeys? And that is the access, for information. People need information. People want information as they move. So, and it is very common to hear like, well, smugglers are providing all of the information. But that is also kind of like this partial truth. Because people, we don't, when we need information for something, we do not always go to just a single source. We try to talk to other people, we get other opinions, we get referrals, we go, we check out the reviews on Google. So this is, while reliable, smuggling services are needed, people also need information about humanitarian assistance. So where are they going to be able to get services? What institutions are out there? What churches they can go to? What shelters they can reach along their way? And something that again was pretty evident during this journey was to identify how essential information on water and food can be. And that is food that is appropriate or adequate to your own, to your culture, to your traditions. This is, kind of a side note. I was growing up as a child in Mexico. I read forever about Lake Titicaca. That's a picture of Lake Titicaca. I was crossing through it. But it was also very sad to hear that in this year, at least 10 people from Haiti have died once they reached the lake. This is at about 12,000 feet in terms of altitude. So reaching that location without having had a chance to acclimate yourself to it can be, lethal. And also the temperatures, get, as you can imagine, get very low, especially during this time of the year, which is the end of the winter in South America. So many of the people have complications that are related to the weather. And for small children, also not having, and for their mothers, not to have access to traditional foods, traditional staples, becomes an issue. There's different humanitarian organizations that are on the ground that are responding to their needs. But many times also because of the way their journeys are organized and the racism and discrimination that they face, they may intentionally, or on purpose, avoid the providers of some of that assistance. And in this context, it's when, again, messaging and social media becomes essential in terms of disseminating information, where people find it, how they can, and where learning, right, who is actually going to give you reliable information becomes key. But as researchers, we actually know, despite the fact that everybody talks about the fact that migrants rely on social media, there's very little research that has been conducted on that, on the actual use and the engagement with social media. We don't really know. We know that they use their phones for a fact. I'm sure that, and I've been in many settings where people say, "Oh, people have better cell phones than I do," or they have or they have better cell phone packages than mine. And the truth is that, yes, most people have a phone and travel, with a phone, and they are able to share some information like that. But thinking about logistics, and this has happened too, and I'm sure, because it has, I'm sure that, many of us have been in this situation, that we end up in a country where we don't have access to data, or, that is not covered in our plan. So imagine, having been on the move, going through multiple countries and trying to get to the U.S.-Mexico border, for example. So people do not always have credit or data. They have to rely on open Wi-Fi services. And something that I've also seen quite often here on the U.S.-Mexico border, once people are here, they sell all of their phones and they just keep one that they can, so that they can use the money and also wait for their CBP appointments, CBP1 appointments. So we also know that people often create these groups for nationality. And as they go and they start, just as we do, all of us are part of more than one group, I'm sure if we look at our phones. And so one of the challenges here, right, is that the more participants that are added, there's this circle of information, and the way information is shared, becomes more complicated, because you cannot always, it's not the same to have a small group with your family and your friends, and then having to open it up to everyone else, and not being able to actually verify the content, if that information is accurate, if that information came from a good source, or if the person who is sharing that information with you has good intentions, as we're going to see during this morning. One hypothesis, right, that we have when it comes to looking into the data and the information that is shared by people online, as they move, is, it would be, well, the closer you are to that person who is originating the information, the person who is developing the information, you are more likely to trust it. Well, it came from my mom, it came from my brother, it came from somebody that I was with at the shelter, so it has to be, and I know this person, so it has to be legit. Something that we hear quite often also, when we try to share information with people that are actually going to help them, once they have entered the U.S., or we tell them, well, these are going to be some of the challenges that you're going to face. They usually say, oh, but my friend who already made it to New York told me that this information was correct. So you are wrong. Like, I got information from a friend, it was on Facebook, it was on Instagram, it had the logo, it had the seal of CBP, so it has to be right. And here, one of the challenges that we have at communicating or at trying to explain or get through people is that the source of this information might, again, maybe hiding details in terms of, how they got there. Like, yes, I made it to New York, but to make it to New York, I had to pay somebody along the way. Or yes, I told you that I made it here, but I'm actually in a different city. That's what, I have also heard among people, they find out that the person they thought was going to be receiving them or welcoming them was actually not there. And so, also seeking to preserve resources. That's something that we have seen lately, quite, I think, during this entire year. How many times people keep sharing the information to get to a specific shelter. I think there was one in San Antonio, the 1300 San Pedro. Everybody came with that information. It's like, somebody told me to get to 1300 San Pedro. And where is that? And so there's all of this information that keeps being shared. But, many times it's limited, it's not specific. And so people don't actually get access to that, to more reliable information. And something that, Chief Manjarres has actually written about in his work, was this concept that I really like to use, is the gap of hope. And how, if somebody else already made it, if my friend already made it, if my neighbor made it, if somebody posted a picture on Facebook that they made it, I can. It doesn't matter what you tell me, what all of you, UNHCR, IOM, or the people at the shelters, I have the right information because, my friend got there. I have a picture, I have the proof. So that also limits our ability to communicate accurate messages to people. That expectation that, yes, everything can go wrong, but there's this tiny bit that can go right, and I am going to be the person who makes it. There's also that expectation that comes with it. So that takes us to the issue of reliable sources. We have reliable sources, right? We have all of these campaigns that are put together by organizations. We have researchers, we have educators, people who are coming together, to give information, to provide reliable information online. And many times, some of the challenges that we see, and these are findings from people who are other researchers who have been looking at campaigns to deter migration or to stop irregular migration. And these are some of the findings, and I think one of the key ones is that data or information that comes from official sources, aka government agencies, is not always accepted. Or where people usually say, well, of course, this is coming from the government, so they don't want me to make it there. They are going to do everything they can to stop me. So I'm not even going to pay attention to those. So we have, this is from a U.S. State Department campaign, from the U.S. Embassy in Nicaragua. And I will just translate it. It says, if you arrive to the border with the U.S. irregularly on your own or accompanied, you will be deported immediately. Do not believe in the lies of the coyotes and do not start a worthless journey. And so, again, here's the campaigns are also many times, and this is from the data that we have, talking with migrants, people know the risks. People are aware of what can happen to them as they travel, through the Darien. People know what is going to happen to them once they travel through Mexico. They have heard about drug trafficking organizations. They have heard about kidnappings. They have heard about extortion. They just do not have the ability to control those dynamics. So they have access to that information, again, and we don't, and many times, the source of that information may not be that reliable. The information that they have may be outdated by the time they actually make it to that location, to that destination. Or they are simply people who have already left. So they are, many of these messages get to people who are already in transit. So at that point, it may also be kind of late for them to receive this message or to rethink their decision to migrate. And that takes us to, what are some of the challenges that we have with the information that is available online. There may be very good intentions in terms of, we're going to have this campaign and we're really going to inform people about what is happening. And, we're going to do everything to make it inclusive and to make it informative. And what the evaluations, the assessments of these campaigns also show is that many times the messages are very hard to understand. They use literacy level or wording, that is complicated, that is hard to follow. If you look at some posts, some publications online, you will see there's this long text that people are really not going to stop to read and try to understand, in detail. Again, regionally, languages are not accessible to migrants who speak, content rather is not accessible to migrants who speak languages other than Spanish. This has often been the case of people from Haiti, and I think that's the case that we know the best. In case there's very few speakers of Creole outside of Haiti or the migration pathways. Also, speakers of indigenous languages, Maya languages within the region. And also, and this is something that I think that several of us deal with here on the border on an everyday basis, information may not be updated or available at the speed that people need it, or the speed that is many times communicated, again, by authorities. You probably, those of you who are here, I assume most of you have heard about the rumors of the bridge. that, when we hear that, or when people hear that, ya abrieron el puente, the bridge is open, or, the restrictions have been lifted, just show up. And how these messages are, in fact, communicated online. So there's contradictory messages or information that comes many times from leadership, regarding policy. We heard just, this week about the 500,000, work permits for Venezuelans. On the, what border was it? I think it was the border with Peru and Bolivia. The coordinators kept asking me, like, oh, so all Venezuelans can apply? Can they just go now? Like, can we send people there? And I was like, I don't know if it's going to be that easy for you to send people there. But by this time, people had already heard about the messages and about the opportunity for the jobs. And if you also read some of the journalistic coverage, there was already concerns over how is New York going to respond to this? There's really not a lot of infrastructure that is going to allow them to do that. There may be information about free transportation being available. This is, also happening in the context of Operation Lone Star, like the trips that are offered to people and how people arrive expecting that they are going to be actually taken to specific locations, when, as we know, these trips do not take them to where they want to go, but to specific states in the country. There's also, and this is something that I've had to deal with, or I've heard of, systematically, how many migrants go to ports of entry, to POEs, where they have heard that there's specific rules that allow women and children, or children, who are on their own, to enter, or where they are going to be received differently, or where they are actually going to be allowed in if they turn themselves in. And one of them, of course, despite the fact of the existence of this very, or what would be more reliable sources of information, we still have word of mouth. We have the chisme. We have, all of the spread of information that, or of images. How many times have you not been deceived by an image that you see online? And we are not migrating. So, my mom is always sending me pictures like, is this really happening? Like, no, Mom, that's not happening, But so people rely on many times or are convinced, once again, by these images, People may share experiences, which really is hard to confirm, when they say, oh, yes, I traveled with this smuggler, or they post their experiences online. He's so reliable, he's so good, God bless him. But how are we actually going to confirm that actually happened, or that publication was actually made by a migrant? This is one publication that came out in one of the groups. This is, I think it says Piedras Negras, Migrantes Piedras Negras, this is the river, on Rio Bravo, Piedras Negras in Coahuila. This is in, South Texas. And if you see this image, like you were like, wow, the river is really dry. But then once we started to look, like, well, this doesn't look like, Piedras Negras or the river. So where does this come from? And this is actually from the U.S. Geological, Association. And they were, just pictures from another part of the country, but that are, many times it's so easy to just clip, to cut and paste information, and for people to react to that, to say, oh, the river doesn't look that bad, or the current doesn't look as strong. Maybe I can cross this time. So there's all of this misinformation, and again, overabundance of images, of messages that create the illusion that, I can make it. There's that gap that is going to allow me to make it through. Thank you.